Hello, everyone. This is Learn to Listen, and thank you for joining us. Today, we have Dr. Nancy Michael, who is the Director of Undergrad Studies for Neuroscience and Behavior at Notre Dame, which is the major that I'm in. And she also is one of the professors for the Neuroscience Lab. So thank you, Dr. Michaels, for being here, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today, because of your advisory role for a lot of students, and especially being a senior myself, I thought it would be great to kind of dive in and to see what advice you've given students across the years for this transition between undergrad and, real life now. So one of the best things you ever told me when I was meeting with you about seeing if I wanted to go to med school or grad school immediately after undergrad was to kind of postpone and really figure out if it was something that I wanted to do. And that for me was really valuable because I feel like there is kind of this unspoken push to have to go right into schooling
Mhm.
after undergrad. And so I'm just curious, where did you kind of like find that advice, like in your own life and throughout the years of advising students?
Yeah, where did I mean, sure. I mean, definitely was informed by my own life, right? Because I had many years of just kind of trying to figure stuff out after undergrad. And I know at this point, right? Well, while it was, I don't know, unsettling. Like I don't know what the right word is, right? But yeah,
Mhm.
like most of my friends were going on to graduate school or medical school or pharmacy school, right? You know what I mean? Um, some kind of professional post grad something. Um, I just didn't know what I wanted to do, right? So I still took the exam, like the GRE, and I was thinking about going to graduate school, but I couldn't write anything down, right? Like you have to write like the letter of intent or the statement of purpose, and like I didn't have any purpose. I didn't have anything to say. Like why should you accept me into your graduate program? I don't know, because I don't know what else to do. Like I couldn't write anything, and so I think that advice is definitely inspired by my own experience, but also watching the experiences of my friends who were pretty certain about what they wanted to do, right? That like it's your life, and unless you really know where you want to lean into, then take the time to find out where you want to lean into, because if you feel pressured to make a choice about something before you're ready, right? It doesn't end up working out very well. And especially in something like medical school where it's like
Right.
50 to $100,000 a year for tuition, man. Like that's not something you want to do and be uncertain about it, right? You don't want to get into year 3 and be like, oops.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, yeah.
And I've been trying to think about this myself because I feel like, I mean, I obviously am very concentrated in the like realm of science and undergrad. Um, but I don't know if it's specifically just tailored to science where there is that kind of like, oh, if you don't go to professional school after, it's like, what did you do wrong in undergrad? Or you didn't do like you didn't work hard enough or don't have good enough grades. I don't know if there's a direct parallel for other like colleges in undergrad. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if, like, from an advisory standpoint, if you feel, um, that really is this, like, specific not I don't wanna say issue, but specific kinda stance that science
Yeah.
undergrad has.
Well, I think too, I think it's a combination of kind of the predispositions of student interest that matriculate in, as well as like Notre Dame College of Science culture as well. You know what I mean? So I think there's definitely more than one thing going on with that, because I think part of Notre Dame recruitment in the sciences is like the medical school success rate, right?
Right.
So like we definitely select for an admissions process, or students who are interested in going to different undergraduate programs will opt into Notre Dame given their medical school success rate. And so I think that those all these kinds of things, they just kind of snowball. Um, yeah, because I was and then also too, especially in the sciences, right? Like from a neuroscience perspective, we can only make decisions about things that we know about, right? So students that like the sciences, like what kind of careers are available in the sciences?
Med school,
Right? Yeah.
graduate school, yeah.
you
Extra
can be a
school.
doctor, you can go to grad school, or you can be a science teacher. And like like, let's be honest, right? Like out of those 3 careers, the doctor is like the most prestigious and most well-paying, and you guys are all super, super bright, right? So like there's like the academic rigor that is absolutely appealing as well. Um, and so I think, right, like it's just, I think, a multi-factored thing that ends up being this really kind of Goliath, both explicit and implicit, like, you must go to medical school. That's not really a thing, right? Which again, it goes back to like, so if you're not sure, that's awesome. Like, lean into that and figure out, because there are lots of things that people can do in the sciences that we desperately need in
Yeah,
communities and in culture, that aren't doctors.
right. Yeah, and it's interesting too because, of course, with grad, I've been reflecting, be like, "Oh my gosh, I remember this and that class," and just talking to underclassmen on my team and stuff, so I definitely noticed the differences too through the years where, like, freshman year, of course, everyone's trying to prove themselves, trying to just stay afloat, like, absorbing all the new, like, novelties in undergrad, but then sophomore year really hits, and you're, like, academically trying to, get the best grades. You're like, I have my place here, I know my friends and my community and whatnot." But it was almost sophomore year, I was, like, really trying to figure out what if I did wanna go to graduate school after,
Yeah,
undergrad, and sitting there, as, like, a 19-year-old and trying to, like, picture, 8 years or whatever in the future.
yeah.
I definitely noticed a difference where I was way less willing to be like, "Oh, maybe I don't wanna go to professional school," versus senior year, now I feel like people are like, "Oh my god, I'm waiting, like, 2 years to go to med school, like, I'm taking time, I'm gonna just relax," and I think it is, of course, something, you're more confident in yourself and you're almost done, so there's kind of that, like, carefree, I did my time,
Mhm.
my 4 years in undergrad, but I'm also curious if COVID has something to do with that, of people just being way more carefree. So what do you think? What have you seen, just like trends?
Yeah, so I think COVID really has, y even if you never got sick from COVID, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
definitely taken its toll. I think it's changed people. I think the ways in which I think it's, and I would agree that I think it has to do with where you're at in your matriculation process, right? I think if you're further along in your matriculation process, I think it really has allowed, students like yourself, like, this opportunity to be like, I'm good, man. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I'm gonna take some time. I'm tired. I'm gonna, like, I'm gonna figure it out, and I'm not in any pressure. Whereas the students that are earlier on in their matriculation, it seems like it's caused just so much more stress, because what they're being told are the normal requirements and the normal expectations and the normal, like resume builders and experiences. They haven't had access to a lot of those things in the last 2
Right,
years. And
okay.
so a lot of students in their earlier matriculation are actually real, like, they seem to be, at least the conversations that I've had with students on campus, they're much more concerned about not being competitive
Oh,
in their,
interesting. I
yeah.
haven't
And
thought
so,
about that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, where like, from a faculty standpoint, I'm just really grateful that we got through it. Like, I think, but I think everybody, no matter what, everybody's tired, right? And so I think, I've been having conversations with community partners, and I have one kind of collaborator down at, the health department too, just in terms of like this last year and a half has impacted everybody so differently, right?
Mhm.
Um, and and there we can't just have mask orders expire and expect that everything is healed, right? Like, and expect that everything is fine. And so, like, what are the intentional steps, right? To like kind of recover from this remarkable immense exhaustion, and also kind of like alleviate fears of not being able to do the normal stuff. I mean, yeah. So
Yeah.
so yes, I think COVID has had a huge impact, not just on like respiratory function.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, not just on the physical.
Right.
Um, and I'd love to honestly dive into that and talk about, like, the different impacts, because I think obviously COVID has framed a lot of the past year and a half, right?
Yeah.
Um, but kinda, like, discuss, like, possible steps that you've been discussing with that, like, affiliate at the health center, because I feel like that will even just, like, discussing, like, things we can do and how we can be intentful in what we're doing next to progress and, like, now we don't the mask mandate, like, it's being lifted,
Yeah.
but just, like, really getting back to that normalcy and what we can do. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I think it starts with just like a I don't know, like honesty, right? Like regardless of how anybody feels about COVID, right? Like the reality is kind of within this country or within any community, right? The spectrum ranges from like it's a farce, it
Right.
never really was a thing, all the way to people that they don't want to breathe fresh air anymore. They won't leave their house, you know what I mean? And so like and so then how do you start a conversation to bring people back together, right?
Mhm.
Um, but then I think much more immediate in terms of like the work that I do and community partnerships and things like that, really the impact on children and families, right?
Right.
So all of these public health measures were put into place to protect against the spread and of a respiratory virus and keep from overwhelming the medical system. But in doing so, right, we have families that have been put in terrible economic situations, have lost their homes, right? Students have been working again, depending on the community. And so this is again part of that massive variability that exists depending on where you're at, like literally your geographic location,
Right.
right? What kind of access to schools did your kids have? How old are your kids? One of the things that I learned last March when we first shut down. So I have a at that time I had a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. So a first grader and a fourth grader when we shut down. And I learned very, very quickly that I don't know how to teach somebody how to read, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
I can teach college students who have all of that kind of prerequisite cognitive framework when
Mhm.
I can, you know what I mean? And like I can do that. All of that prerequisite stuff. How do you teach somebody how to read? I have no idea,
I
right?
would
Like
yeah.
I got nothing, right? Like a phoneme and vowel teams and diphthongs and like all of these different thing digraphs and like we were diagramming words and I was like, I don't remember ever doing this.
Yeah, you're like, "I never learned this," so
No, exactly, right? Like people always talk about like they changed math. There's all this new math. So there's not only new math, but like literally when I just remember learning how to read and I feel like we just had to memorize stuff. Like I don't remember
yeah,
doing
just
any of
practice.
closed vowels and open vowels and all these things.
I
I
have
don't
no clue
know.
what that yeah.
Right, exactly. Where my fourth grader, right, she was far enough along that she was pretty well independent,
Mhm.
right? She would get frustrated and stuff, but like her questions were much more about like, I don't understand what this questions means in the context of this passage.
Yeah, right.
I can help with that, right?
Huh.
So we have a generation. What conversations do we have? How do we support schools? How do we support teachers? How do we support families? How do we support kiddos in reintroducing them not only to like what school looks like, but really so many families and children have been so isolated. So
Right.
how do you first, right? And this is really hard in an academic setting. How do you first reintroduce socialization and reestablish, right? Again, so this kind of spectra of farce to paranoia. How do you reestablish that a classroom is a safe place to be? How
Mhm.
do you reestablish that it's not only a good thing, like not only safe, but like actually necessary for human health and well-being to be able to give somebody a hug without
Right.
a mask on, right? Like, so I mean, and again, having a mask order expire doesn't do any of those things,
Yeah.
right? So how do we be really intentional? How do we kind of unpack in terms of like all you neuroscience and behavior majors that might be listening, right? So
Yeah.
how do you take what you understand about like plasticity and emotional salience and context learning and really think about the impact of the last year and a half on nervous system
Right.
and interpretation of environment and behavior and again in terms of not like these stimulus response behaviors and physiological responses that have been created over the last year and a half,
Mhm.
right? Like some of them might be helpful, many of them probably aren't,
Yeah.
right? In the context of like reopening strategy.
Yeah.
Right, like, and I definitely had air quotes around that reopening strategy, right? Like in these conversations, I don't think are part of reopening strategy in, maybe within schools, but
Yeah.
how do communities
Mhm.
support that effort, right? Because if kiddos aren't healthy and if families aren't healthy, communities aren't healthy.
Right. Yeah,
So
that's what honestly thinking about it myself, that is one of my worries, is that it's just gonna kinda, like, be, like, left up to every person themselves of to
Sure.
how they're gonna navigate,
Yeah.
finding their way back, and maybe, like, the friends they unfortunately lost due to COVID, or the family they didn't see, or anything like that, and, of course, I don't really think the government is gonna, of course, make any policies about that and
Mhm.
really give resources to people, so it's gonna come down to those communities and, like, the schools and possibly, like, the local YMCA, stuff like that,
Yeah.
where that's where majority of people are gonna find those resources or unfortunately not find them and need them. So I
Yeah.
think and now we're starting to see, like, of course, masks, not like, the mask mandate being lifted, but really I think the biggest hurdle is gonna be, like, erasing that anxiety of many people being or that even the guilt of feeling like, "Oh, there's more than, 10 people here." Like,
Yeah.
erasing kind of that new and weird feeling of, "Oh, like, I shouldn't be here. I should remove myself from this situation
Yeah.
because there's so many people here." But now it's okay or,
Right.
like, we're getting back to normal. Um, and
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know if we have any answers for that, honestly.
Yeah, other than, right? And so I think you have articulated so well, right? Like the plasticity that really has taken place in the last year and a half because Christmas 2019, it wouldn't be a big deal,
Right.
right? But then, like news started to trickle in and right? Like we all started getting worried and now it is, right? And so it is the unlearning of the anxiety associated with, or the fear associated with, or the uncertainty associated with these social settings. And again, from a human nervous system health and well-being standpoint, right? The only thing that right, like we need people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I
Yeah,
think that's
if
another.
anything we've learned, yeah, we need
Yeah,
people.
yeah. Yeah, a universal lesson, right? Is
Uh-huh.
that, like, it's really, really clear that we've all, like, felt to our core the absence of being able to, like, embrace and even, like, something as silly or whatever as, like, I was so grateful for the opportunity to be on campus, but not being able to see students' faces,
Yeah,
right? Like, there's so much information we get about communication and connectedness from a facial expression, but a facial expression in real life, because it's not just
yeah,
somebody's face, but it's like all of the information that
body
you get.
language and everything.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So when you start to feel those things, right? It's much more a matter of the top-down regulation
Mm,
than to say like, "Oh, wait a second. Check yourself, amygdala." Right? You know what I mean? Like and just be like, "No, no, no." Like this entire crowd, right? So, for example, we have this senior picture tomorrow. And
yeah.
don't think I haven't done that exact same thing. Like, do we wear masks just because we're used to wearing masks? But then the email came out Friday and was like, "Do it."
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Um
exactly.
yeah, and so kind of knowing that going into it, just really having to be intentional with myself that, like, it really is an opportunity for joy and celebration, and, like, I will give anybody that wants a hug, I'll ask you, but
Yeah,
anybody that wants a hug, man, I'm vaccinated, you're vaccinated, like, let's do it.
and hug now, yeah, right?
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and I think I like, the best thing I've found for myself and just friends is definitely catching myself in the moment of being like, "Oh," like, walking into a restaurant or being, like, surrounded by more students outside and without masks on, it's like, "Oh my gosh, it's so weird," like, to finally see people
yeah,
without their masks on, and just, like, not to kinda, like, have to, like, sneak around, like, with, like, a picture, be like, "Oh, take your mask off really quick and then put it
right?
back on." Like,
Mhm,
everyone did it, yeah, you're just
mhm,
like, rip it off, hold it out of the
yep,
picture for, like, a second, and then "Okay, everyone put it back on." Um, and, of course, there's a little bit of, like, a joke in that, but there's a lot behind, just even taking that mask off, and I think a lot too, like, in addition to anxiety, at least this is what I've talked to my friends about, is guilt too that kinda surrounds
yeah,
COVID and, how you navigate it, whether it is, like, wherever you fall on that spectrum, I think
yeah,
especially as a student and senior wanting to see people and, whatnot, kind of having to erase that guilt of being like, "Oh, I can see my friends now," um, and, get back to normal activities and not have to be super, super aware
yeah.
of, the cleanliness of everything and cleaning, like, wherever you go, wherever you touch, like hand
Yeah.
sanitizer 24/7.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious from an advisor's point of view, or even just like in the neuro community, like what, I guess, how do we navigate the guilt aspect of that? Like it has to do with that neural plasticity, but kind of
Yeah.
like reframing, reworking it. So that hopefully it's a thing in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, right? I think that was we had it was an informal gathering of under 25 people, right? So the senior leadership from this year and the senior leadership that will step up
Mhm.
for next year, total of 12.
Yeah.
Just for anybody, right?
Yeah, you're
Um,
like, right, I still have to
I
correct
know.
that.
Informal, we were outside, we ate outside. Anyway, they came down to the house, and so one of the things that like we talked about with next year's class is that like what do we even do, right?
Mhm.
Because so just to kind of a little bit more context, we no longer have students. So in historically, right, our senior class would offer peer advising to the sophomore class for abroad studies.
Right.
We don't have that anymore, right? Like nobody's been abroad.
Yeah.
Um, we our rising juniors have never been on campus
It's
for a
crazy.
full academic year without being impacted,
Yeah.
right? So our rising seniors are the only class that has been on campus in like the before times,
Yeah.
right? Had an entire academic year of before time exposure and experience. And so that's a great question. And that's what I asked him because like I don't know. I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't know what the answers are right now. I know that we need to do something, many things. Um, but I think one of the things that I have that remains an open question that I've struggled with that I can't figure out what the right answer or the right path forward is, is this whole like kind of mentorship, trusting relationship thing anyway, right? Like
Yeah.
how do you right? Because Notre Dame has such a powerful culture of academic excellence. And
Mhm.
so much of what we talk about is around academic excellence and providing opportunities and everything. Um, but like like we're talking about anxiety and guilt around socialization,
Yeah.
right? So how do you almost do not really an about face because the academic stuff isn't going anywhere, right?
Mhm.
But like how do you really shift, expand on, right, what the major provides to really try to address in earnest and with humility like the real issues of mental health that exist so prevalently
Yeah.
on campus, right? Because even in the before times, right? Like it's no secret that anxiety and depression and substance use are issues on campus, right? Like those
Yeah.
are issues on campus.
Mhm.
Issues for our students, probably issues for our right, like issues for people. Um, and then just kind of redoubled with all of the additional stressors of the last year and a half.
Right.
That's a long way to say that I don't really know, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm trying to figure it out, right? So if anybody listening has ideas, right?
Yeah.
Like quite seriously, like I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure because I
Mhm.
don't know what people are going to need other than needs are greater
Right.
for
Yeah. And I
before.
think, yeah, I think COVID, one of the things that I've seen is just like a greater, I mean, in some aspects, right? But just a greater increase in empathy for those who did struggle with mental health before the
Mhm,
pandemic. Because
mhm,
I think now everyone feeling that like solitude and not having that freedom to, go see the people they need to see, like their support
yeah,
system.
yeah,
I think now a lot more people have sympathy and maybe even had some mental health struggles through the pandemic that they're now gonna, um, probably experience until we can figure out the right resources for people to get rid of that, like all the emotions surrounding socialization now. Um, and I think in one way, it's been a bonding experience almost for, I know, especially like the senior class, everyone now with just kind of leaving is like, there isn't any more room for that drama or anything that happens, when
mhm,
you're younger. But everyone's just like so much more willing to, talk to everyone, meet people like whenever they can. It's like you're kind of just grasping at any opportunity because there is that sense of missing out,
Yeah.
like having, a year and a half of normalcy just kind of taken away. Um, and I think it'll be interesting, especially it's great timing, of course, with graduation coming up and the mask mandate being lifted. And now 90% of our undergrad is vaccinated. So
Mhm.
I'm super proud of our community for doing that, but
Yeah,
I was
yeah, yeah.
unsure if it would actually happen. But of course, now I know people are saying, oh, we have senior week and we can do our senior social, and that's so great. But I know that more often than not, there's gonna be a lot of classmates and a lot of people in our community that are super stressed,
Yeah,
because now even if you have gotten over the anxious part or the guilty part about being with more people, there's still that, "Oh my god," like, that overwhelming fear that you're now awkward because you haven't seen these people for so long,
yeah, yeah,
right? So, everyone's like, "Oh my gosh," it's like a reunion even though I've been like in this community, probably living right next door to them, but I just haven't seen them. And a lot of
yeah,
that too is attributed to moving off campus and not seeing people just in and around walking and at the dining halls and stuff like that. But I think that's also a very interesting nuance where, maybe you'll get over those like more internal feelings and emotions. And then you
yeah.
also have to get over like the, like, worry that you yourself you're like, "Oh my gosh, everyone's thinking I'm, like, being so weird or silent or whatever," but really
Uh-huh.
everyone the irony in it is everyone is like, "Oh my gosh, what am I even talking about?" You know?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that's gonna be also another kinda hurdle. Um
Yeah. So I have a question for you related to that then.
Uh-huh.
Like, this is a running joke that I have with myself.
Yeah.
So when people ask you the question, like, when you're walking on campus, "Hey, how's it
Mhm.
going? Good. How are you? Good." Right? In a matter of like 2 seconds when you're walking back and like past, right?
Right.
Clearly, like I always am like, well, that just tells people that you don't actually really care, right? So it's like this really, really strong cultural thing that implicitly says, like, I don't really want to hear what you have to say because
Yeah.
I clearly don't have the time to listen. So,
Uh-huh.
my question, given that, do you think people will be honest then? Or do you think it'll just like, you know what I mean? Like, do we have a choice? Do we have a choice to be like, okay, when somebody asks me how I'm doing, then I have the opportunity to be like, you know what, Mariah? I'm really tired. I have never felt so burnt out in my entire lifetime. And the moment commencement is done, I'm going to come home and I'm going to stare out into my backyard for like 3 days.
I
Right?
yeah, no, that's a really good question, honestly. And I know it'll definitely I think what will change people's answers or what they'll do is definitely their temperament. Because
Hmm.
myself, I very much am like optimistic and wanna hear people, so usually I'll be like, "Oh my gosh, no, tell me the honest answer," right? Like, I wanna hear
Yeah.
like, if you're tired and you're gonna go home after, a week of grad and just sit and do nothing, totally understand that. But I know my response personally will probably be like, "Oh my god, I'm just so excited to see you." I'm just gonna like, my immediate response, even if I am tired, I'm just gonna like, "Oh my god, I'm so good. This is what I've been up to," and I usually tend towards the positive things before
Uh-huh.
the negative things. So I think that will be my response. I think people are way more um curious about what everyone is doing just because of the fact that we are leaving. So like
Hmm.
I can't even keep up with Instagram updates and stuff like that, but
I can imagine.
like, find and, like, LinkedIn too, like, "Oh my gosh, this person got this job, and they're doing this after grad, they're doing, this service trip, or they're going to this school, doing research," whatever it is. So when I see someone, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I actually, like, wanna know what are you going to be doing for the
Yeah.
next, however many, months." But I think it will be people are gonna be probably trending towards just being like, "Oh my god, I'm so good, how are you? I'm so excited for graduation." Like,
Uh-huh.
because I think that's what they think they're probably supposed to say too. Um, but I feel like people at especially the more senior events will probably just be so happy and, you know,
Hmm.
grateful that we're having just something.
Yeah.
But people are probably gonna just kinda ride off of that high energy, you know?
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting for sure. Um, and super fun. I'm really excited, so that's good.
Yeah. It'll be great.
Mhm. I'd love to kind of circle back too, because we've been talking a lot about undergrad and students, especially. But what have you seen trends across like the South Bend community? with the impacts of COVID. And I'm also curious if, we think a lot of research is going to come out about trends within the pandemic. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, I mean, I'll answer the first one. Second part first. So yes, clearly, right? There's going to be research, there's going to be data, there's going to, right? But trends in the community, I think what I would like to suggest is that, like, we don't have to wait for papers to be published to, like, ask somebody at the health department or ask somebody in family services, or you know what I mean, like, what's been happening and how do we respond now, because
mhm.
we don't have to wait for the peer review process, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
all parts of communities, and we're all community members, and we can all get engaged now, right? Okay,
Mhm.
so as part of reopening strategy, like, how do we support families? And so trends, just like beliefs about COVID, I think that's this a similar, right? And which also makes it a more challenging conversation, or not challenging. It also requires us to be much more thoughtful in the conversation,
Mhm.
because there's going to be just as much diversity of experience in terms of how you and your family weathered the last year and a half, as there is beliefs about what coronavirus is anyway, right?
Mhm.
So within the community, we have people who are totally fine, right? Like, um, and we have people who lost their jobs, lost their housing, numbers wise, right?
Mhm.
We have one of the three school districts that was virtual, and I think they went back in mid-March or early April, right? I'm not too sure about Mishawaka. I think that they were virtual or hybrid. And Penn, I know the most, that's where my kids go, so I know the most, most about what happened in Penn. They were virtual for the first month, and then at the elementary school, Penn Elementary, at the elementary school level, right? My kids were able to be in person since middle of September. The junior high was, they would switch days, like, so they'd have half the students on
Right.
school one day, the next, back and forth, so only a couple of days a week. Then they went virtual for like a month or two over the winter break and came back in January. Um, so from right, so consistency of schooling, right? And then within that consistency or inconsistency, then you have access, right? So families with or without broadband internet, families with or without devices, right? Um, the districts that my kids go to are, they're lucky enough that if the students didn't have devices, they were able to give the students Chromebooks that the students could take with them.
That's nice.
Um, that's not necessarily the case all over the country, right? So,
Right.
like, right? And, so do you have a device? Do you have broadband? Did you have a parent that was able to, right? Like, not even a parent, but, like, was there somebody there that you could ask for help if you needed help?
Mhm.
Or were your parents, frontline workers or critical resource support or infrastructure support? And so you were, so who knows what education looks like, right? The difference between emerging learners versus, like, learners who already know how to read. The tagline, the saying that I learned is, from my kids' school, is that, like, K through 3 is learning to read,
Mhm.
and then, like, above that is reading to learn,
Oh,
right? So,
okay.
like, that's a really giant difference in
Mhm.
framework. And so again, like joke I made earlier, I don't know how to teach somebody how to read, right?
Yeah.
So there's a generation of kids that may or may not have had somebody at home with them that knows how to teach somebody to read,
Yeah.
right? Like, oops. And then, right, to adolescence, what do adolescents need, right? There's social salient shifts that occur during adolescence that are necessary
Mm.
neurobiologically. And so we have teenagers who have been incredibly so, right? So I worry the most for our teenagers,
Yeah.
in terms of
Same.
isolation and the impact of, like, depression and anxiety and substance use kinds of things. I know three people who have taken their own life, and, right, like, they didn't die of COVID, but they died of a side effect of social isolation of um, I know, statistically speaking, domestic violence skyrocketed, in this community. Substance use and suicidal ideation calls have gone, and treatments and calls have gone up. Um, right, we've seen a lot more violence in the community, which can be kind of traced back to, like economic instability kinds of things, right? Like, we
Yeah.
can say, like, yes, gun violence, and I'm not condoning gun violence, but like if you look at economic opportunity and access and right, like all of the stability factors,
Mhm.
um, those have just been kind of upended. Um, so again, really long answer. We can wait for papers to be published about the impact of COVID, but like just ask somebody.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Right? Yeah, like it's clear that it's had an impact, right? Like well beyond a respiratory virus.
Mhm.
And so what conversations are necessary? How do you use your skills to engage wherever you go, right? After
Right.
wherever you go, how do you use your skills to engage in your community where you're at, just to kind of like help and support and elevate and listen. And I mean, I can especially, I'm super biased about neuroscience, but like understanding that neuroplasticity is a thing and that fear and isolation have real impacts on not only brain and behavior, but also like the medical physiology, right? That's why social determinants are really social correlates, right? It's because all this environmental stuff and stress dose shifts physiology, right? And again, it's not determinate at all. It's correlative. And one of the best ways that we can help heal is by showing up in earnest for other people, right?
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
so
Yeah, I think, like, a more we were talking about earlier, like, even just policies or things we can do to be intentful, and I think a proactive approach much rather, um,
yeah,
rather than a reactive approach
yeah,
is, I think, something as a nation we need, and honestly, globally, we need because, like you said, there's depending on what age you've like, what age group you've been in while COVID has hit, there's just so much variability in what you need, some of it's educational, some of it's social, some of it's economic, so it's like it's such a huge monster to tackle, honestly,
yeah,
and I'm expecting to see schools, honestly, having to especially with kids, having to be the barrier or the accessibility point for all these students because, say you have students who didn't learn how to read, right? But then some students did. So even within these
yeah,
age groups, there's so much variability, let alone if you like look at, first graders compared to sixth graders. Um, there's going to be differences obviously in their reading abilities, but if you never have those building blocks, now we have to go back,
yeah,
and so it's
yep,
going to slow the progress or change it so much to a point. So it's like we need tailored, almost probably individual aspects of it, but that's going to overwhelm the school systems
yeah,
because right, like they're trying to deal with how to get everyone safe in the classroom
yeah,
right now, let alone trying to have all these additional resources um,
yeah,
that underprivileged communities will not be getting, and those are probably the communities that need them the most.
yeah,
Um, and I think
yeah,
that's one of the most tragic aspects of the pandemic.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it really, I think we as a society or as a culture often turn to the public education system as
Mhm.
like the way to fix everything, and
Right.
what we blame also for the way that, right, like, and my hope is that yes, so public education I think is the greatest point of access, right? That,
Mhm.
right, like what an incredible experiment of education that this country has done. And like I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it is this amazing, incredible promise to children at large, right? Um, but we as community members and as caregivers can't abnegate our responsibility in care because of the public education system is there, right? And I think that's often what we do. Um, it's not the school's job to fix it, right? It's our job to support our kids and our job to support our communities and our job to support our schools and our teachers, because they really are like the heroes in all of this, right? With, I mean, like, teachers are amazing. Like
Mhm.
K-12 early childhood
Oh
teachers,
my gosh, the
oh my
pain.
gosh, right? Like they have the most important jobs
Mhm.
in the country, arguably, right? Like because without access to kind of a loving place to go to learn, right? And most, yeah. And again, like I don't know, I just think teachers get so much flack and are blamed for so much, but man, I just think like now is the time for like everybody, whether or not you have kids in the district, whatever district you live in, just be like, okay, how can I help, man? Like, what do
Yeah.
you need me to do? I can be a classroom volunteer. I can come in and read with kids. Like, what do you need? And how
Mhm.
can I help?
Yeah, I'm hoping, all the parents and the siblings who are trying to help teach their younger their younglings, now they probably have much more appreciation for teachers.
Heck
Uh,
yeah.
and even I was babysitting as well, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I should be able to teach, this simple math," but the things they're saying, it's just I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's so foreign to me now."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because you assume, right? Again, like I think so much of the time when we think about teaching, we assume all of the like the similar framework that we have, right? So
yeah,
like I would use the words that make sense in my world, but like that doesn't work with a 5-year-old or
yeah,
a 7-year-old or like yeah, yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing that you can teach somebody all of those abstract things that need to exist in synaptic architecture to be able
mhm,
to understand what a number is in the first place and that it represents a value. And then you can manipulate that.
yeah.
Like, it never even occurred to me that you have to do, it's just like, oh my gosh, you have to do what now? You mean you can't
Yeah,
just add? Like,
uh-huh, and,
I
like,
don't
in simple
understand.
terms too,
Mhm, mhm. So,
Yeah, so that's a great, if, like, people are looking of how to be intentful and help communities be, restored, is to volunteer time in schools,
yeah,
um, because I think that will alleviate, hopefully, some of the stress
yeah.
I think schools are gonna be feeling or already are
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah, or community centers or Big Brothers Big Sisters or
Yeah,
Boys and Girls Club, like there are so many ways or yeah, there's so and everybody has a skill, right? Like I remember sitting in um it was like a community, I don't know what it would be, community capacity building meeting at one point in time, where this woman from the ACE interface named Laura Porter was giving a talk about community capacity building, right? And so they had these brainstorming sessions. And then there was this woman, she told the story of this woman who was an older retired woman who, completed high school, didn't have a college, and she's like, I really want to be able to do something, but like in her mind, she was like, but I don't have anything.
mhm,
Right, like, in her mind, she didn't have any skills to offer, right? And, like, so meeting goes on, whatever, whatever, and at some point later on, the woman stand up, she's like, "I've got it." Okay, what is it, right? She's like, "Grandparents to go," right? And so in unpacking what that idea was, right, and it made me cry because as somebody who's transplanted to this area, we don't have family, we don't have right, like, the only people that I know here are also other working professionals that also struggle with daycare and sick kids, and, we don't have the support network in place for that, um, but the idea with grandparents to go so that, like, if somebody needed childcare, right? So, like, so that she created this community network of retired individuals that still wanted to be around kids and be engaged with families that also maybe didn't have their families in the immediate area. They were background checked. They created a partnership with the police department. They were background checked. They would come in to get a house, like somebody would come in to evaluate the safety of their house. And so, like, you know what I mean? Like it was a really
yeah,
legit or became a really legit thing. And it was just because like, I'm gonna cry again. Like I cry every time I think about it, like just because she wanted help, right? And she
uh,
had an idea and there was enough communication that existed and a collaborative spirit in that community that allowed it to become a reality, right? Um,
right,
because like I think that's what so many caregivers struggle with so much is that they just when they're not able to take care of the people that they love, you just want to know that they will be loved by
mhm.
whomever they are being cared for, like, I don't know.
That's
Yeah.
such I mean, it's gonna almost make me cry, right? Like, that's such a good, wholesome idea, honestly, it should be a thing nationwide, grandparents to go.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
And
especially
it's good for
too.
everybody.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I know some people don't like spending time with kids, but I've always been around kids, like babysitting, camps, whatnot, at home, and it
Yeah,
is a really different environment,
yeah,
being at college and not kinda seeing kids walk around the neighborhood and, like, on their
yeah,
bikes and, like,
yeah,
just being, fun little characters. So I think that is a great idea. Finding those little pockets or those little niches that, before you're like, oh, you don't even know you're missing it. But then once you hear an idea like that, you're like, oh my gosh, how have we not thought about that? Right.
Right.
So that's a great example.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, and just to illustrate, like, that it doesn't have to be like, everybody has something that they can contribute, right?
mhm,
Like, you don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or whatever, like, that that
mhm.
everybody's got something they can contribute, and in a collaborative environment, right? And I think that that's where, like, we all need to just kinda, like, go forth with a little bit of humility, right? That, like, I don't know what the answers are going forward.
Yeah.
I really don't, right? Like, I know that what we have now is not a place I feel good about leaving for my kids,
Right.
And so how do I be a part of kind of creating that collaboration? How do I listen? How do I, like check
Mhm.
myself
Right.
to know when I need to listen because I don't have the answers, right? All I know about is neuroscience.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
I
You
wouldn't say all you know about is neuroscience, but
know?
definitely an area of expertise for sure.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean that as I've said before, like that was part of my mission with Learn to Listen and just, creating an environment and kind of forcing myself honestly to explore and um like have these reasons to listen to other people and to kind of like help foster some of that connectedness we've lost because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And, being neuro myself, I understand, like, neuronal plasticity and the educational side of that, and, so when I'm struggling, I'm like, "Oh, no, I can change how I'm perceiving the world," but I
Yeah.
think that gets lost in a lot of people because, if you don't academically study neuroscience and how our neurons are actually changing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And why would you ever know about this unless, you take it upon yourself to learn? So I think that's one of the most, valuable things I'll take with me. But I even struggle, and I wonder if you have any ideas about this, but like the most effective way as we are trying to get through this pandemic and erase those feelings or those emotions about guilt and anxiety and everything that comes along with, being in basically isolation for the past year and a half, the best way to, rewire our approaches and our thoughts um, to like socialization. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a best way because everybody's different,
Mm,
right? Like, there are some people that are gonna be, like you said, right? Like the senior class might be like rejoicing to be able to come back together for like the last week without like restrictions, right? Um, and that approach is gonna be really, really different. But I think if there could be one universal, which might not be, but just like the intentionality,
mm,
right? That like whether you're approaching it from like a space of like overwhelming joy or tremendous fear, just being really intentional in right on the anxiety side of things, just right that you're able to be intentional about maybe like reviewing what we know,
mhm,
right? And in fully right, like fully vaccinated crowds, right? Like we now are at the level of like what we've always accepted as normal acceptable risk. Like it's actually you're taking more of a risk to get into your car to drive anywhere than you would be walking around, like doing all the things that we did in the before times, right? Um, but then also just being really intentional in enjoy like I hope one of the things that we can take for forever is just being really intentional in enjoying the joy that we experience when we are able to come together and like even mundane things like going to class
yeah.
shouldn't be taken for granted,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Yes, I definitely feel that, like on those like early 8 a.m. classes, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to lug myself all the way over like
Uh-huh.
opposite side of campus in the snow. And then, like trying to not fall asleep in the classroom. I don't think I don't think I'll ever not be grateful for those opportunities to be in the classroom with the people who are also doing the same thing, right? So there's
Right.
community in that where you're like, okay, yes, I'm gonna go to class now and
Yep.
or even like meetings, whatever. Um but, there's a little bit more of a peacefulness, I guess, knowing
Yeah.
that, like, "Oh, I can do these things," right?
Yeah.
It's always
Yeah.
grass is always greener, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
That it really, yeah, it is. It really is like an opportunity or a luxury. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So just being intentional, and that can be intentional in preparation if that's what you need, or intentional in the reflection. But I think, yeah. Yeah.
mhm.
Intentionality.
Yeah, I think that's a great, kind of thing to hold on to, and I'll definitely take that, with me, as through grad week. Have all these, the little moments where you kinda step back and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is so nice." Those are
Mhm.
occurring way more,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
for myself, and I hope for a lot of other people,
Yeah.
but it's been so great, chatting with you, and I've loved this. Thank you again for coming on the
Yeah.
podcast, sharing your advice, um, and
Thanks for
really
the
expertise.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, this was super fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Michaels. I'll
yeah.
see you all later.
See you later. All right.
Alright.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. See you tomorrow.
Thanks again.